MS1, Block 3, Unit 11, Managing Change. 11.1 Introduction. You are perhaps aware about axiom that only certainty in the world that are will be change. The old older changed, yielding place to new. In this process of change, the Darwinian principle of adaptation and natural selection are as true for the corporate world as they are for the animate. If you compare closely, you will find that in many respects, an organization is akin to a living organism. Just as any living organism needs to keep harmony with ever changing environments for its survival, does an organization need to respond to changes in the market, governments, creditors, communities, even the weather's survival of the fittest is the unwritten but the radical rule of this game. The environment which engulfs an organization provides the resources and opportunities for the organization's existence. At the same time, the environment itself imposes sanctions determining what an organization can or cannot do. If an organization is to survive, grow, and remain prosperous, it must adapt to the demands of the environment. Since these demands are constantly changing, organization must also change. What are some of the changes which affect almost all organizations in the past few decades? A short list is given here, but you can lengthen it from your own observations of events. Technological innovations have multiplied products and knows how are fast becoming obsolete. Basic resources have progressively become more expensive. Competition has sharply increased. Communication and computers have reduced the time needed to make decisions. Environmental and consumer interest groups have become highly influential. The drive for social equity has gained momentum. The economic interdependence among countries have become more apparent. These and scores of other changes compel an organization to cope with the environment and become more adaptive. In fact, as a response to the change in the environment, the attributes of the organizations are changing. Examine some such continua of attributes towards which more dynamic organizations are shifting. Direction of changes from formal to informal, from structured to less structured, from definite to ambiguous, from deterministic to probabilistic, from conservative to opportunistic. What happens when organizations fail to adapt? The answer is unequivocal. They become extinct, but much before such a catastrophe, you can diagnose the syndromes of organizational maladjustment. Here is a list of some such syndromes who have serious names are trying to conceal the malady of maladjustment. Some syndromes of organizational maladjustment. Amoeba. Lack of strong direction from top executives, not enough structure, order to guidance leading to activity trap, that is, doing things without knowing where one is heading to. Anarchy, a situational upheaval where leadership responsibilities, functions, and resources are in dispute. Buggy whip, clinging to obsolete products, services, and practices which no longer have potential for sustaining livelihood. Deadlock, standoff conditions between managers and leaders of workforce leading to toxic antagonistic relations between and faction. mom and pop. Small company managers will not help the company grow past the awkward state, myopia, the no future orientation, little thought to strategy, sense of direction, and advanced planning, live day to day, week to week. Rat race, toxic climate coming from oppressive, primitive, slave driving policy, remote control, too much administrative or executive control from the parent body, decision making autonomy is seriously impaired. Rigor mortis, conditions of inertia and constricted activity prevail. Primary organization's value is structure and order. The illustrative list of syndromes of organizational maladjustment is meant to draw your attention to the fact that failure to change at an appropriate time typically results in some acute or chronic malaise for an organization, eventually forcing it to die. However, a diagnostic knowledge of when to initiate change and skill of managing change to a long way to prevent such disaster. This unit is designed to achieve such purposes. 11.2 topic: Nature of change. Organizations introduce changes through people. Unless the people are willing to accept the need and responsibility of organizational change, intended changes can never be translated into reality. In addition, individuals have to learn to adapt their attitudes and behavioral patterns to constantly changing environment. In this section, we are going to focus on three frequently raised issues on the nature of change. First, can we bring change in an organization by beginning to change at the individual level only? Second, does organizational change take place through a slow unfolding process of true catalytic events overturning co-arrangements? Third, do we always have to comply to environmental changes or can we also initiate changes? Individual change and organizational change. When the issue before you is management of change, it may be useful to note the difference between individual change and organizational change, although the two are interwoven. Individual change is behavioral, determined by individual characteristics of members such as knowledge, attitude, beliefs, needs, expectations, etc. It is possible to bring about a total change in an organization by changing behaviors of individual members through participative educative strategy. Of course, the degree of difficulty involved in the change and the time taken to change will be primarily dependent upon what exactly is your target of change. As figure 1 shows, your target of changes is a person's knowledge. It would not be very difficult and time consuming endeavor. For example, let us assume that you did not know about management of change in an organization. However, if you spend a couple of hours on this unit, you will know several aspects of this topic. Changing attitudes Changing attitudes is usually considered more difficult and time taking when compared to changing knowledge. For some, organizational change is beneficial, but for others, it is a threat, a signal of danger, and a source of fear. Some view changes as a vital life force, others may perceive it as a disturbance to be avoided or borne with stolidity and patience. The attitudes toward change are largely dependent upon the context of the situation, the nature and the extent of change, and the manner in which change are initiated and executed, and these attitudes are more difficult to modify than the knowledge about the change. Changing individual behavior is a still more time taking and difficult task. We often assume that having enough knowledge and a positive attitude towards something will naturally result in changing behavior or modification towards that direction, but it does not necessarily happen. For example, we know that honesty is the best policy. We might have favorable attitudes towards people who are honest and dislike those who are dishonest, but in certain situations we still may act in a less honest manner. The linkage between attitude and behavior is not so straightforward, but and for this reason changing behavior is more difficult than changing knowledge or attitudes. You can possibly reason why changing the behavior of a group is usually a more prolonged and harder task. Every group has its own dynamic of push and pull, which attempts to neutralize the change in the individual and continuous effort that are expended to maintain norm. Due to this group dynamics, individual numbers change behavior may revert to earlier normative behavior so that the status quo is maintained. However, due to the same reason of groups overriding influence on individual members, sometimes it may be easier to tackle the groups as a whole rather than trying to change a member's behavior in an isolated manner. Bringing total behavioral change in all the groups and members in an organizational usually entail the most difficult long effort. More often than not, it is a slow, painful process to usher in a total cultural change in an organization. Here's a figure, and it is only intended to highlight that it is possible, although difficult and prolonged, to bring about total behavior change in an organization, starting with its individual members. However, it is not the only route. It is equally possible to influence and change the total organization behave without focusing at the level of individual change of knowledge, attitude, and behavior. Total organizational change can be brought about by modifying the organization's structures, policies, procedures, techniques, etc. These type of change alter prescribed relationships and roles assigned to members and eventually modify the individual members' behavior and attitudes. Thus, a focus of true attempt to change the structure, policies, procedures, techniques, personals, or it can be both. As these two kinds of changes are interdependent, the complexity of managing changes makes it necessary for you to understand both the behavioral and non behavioral approaches to change. Evolutionary change and revolutionary change. When you compare an organization with any other open system organism, you can describe it in terms of its birth, growth, maturity, senility, decline, entropy, or death. Any organization, like any other organism, passes through these stages and in the process changes itself from one form to another form. But is this change smooth, gradually, or evolutionary, or violent, radically, and revolutionary? Probably it is both. Time of tumultuous turbulence surface between the smooth periods of evolution. Look at the following exhibits on the stage of organization's change and development. You will find that in each stage there are some critical concerns and key issues which must be addressed to and satisfactorily solved. The exhibit also shows the consequences if the concerns are not met with satisfaction. In order to meet the critical concern of each stage, organizations go through some rapid, visible shake-ups of their structure, policies, procedures, techniques, personals, etc. These changes in calmer moments of strategic growth may be viewed as revolutionary changes. You will be able to appreciate the difference between the two degrees of changes through yet another model of organization's growth given by Larry Granier 1972. Grenier postulates that as an organization grows from young to mature stage, tiny size to giant, it passes through five stages of evolution, each of which ends with a period of crisis and revolution. Evolutionary periods are characterized by the dominant management styles used to achieve growth, while revolutionary periods are characterized by the dominant problems that must be solved before growth continues. The first phase of newly born organization is characterized by creating a viable product in an promising market. The founders, who are usually technically brilliant and entrepreneurially oriented, manage their endeavor themselves in an ad hoc manner with little respect to any formal system of communication and control. Their physical and mental energies are entirely absorbed in making and selling, but as the organization starts growing from its teeny embryonic stage, many managerial problems crop up, forcing the founders to wonder as to who is going to lead the organizations out of confusion. By the end of the first phase, the crisis of leadership has emerged. The solution usually lies in locating and installing a strong business manager who is acceptable to the founders and who can pull the organization together. When leadership crisis forces the founders to relinquish some of their power to a professional manager, organizational growth is achieved by direction through systematization of operating procedures. The manager is usually given a free hand and jealousy accepts more of the responsibility of initiating direction, but the lower level supervisor are treated merely as functional specialists devoid of any decisions making authority. In course of growth for the organization, the lower level managers demands more autonomy in decision making, and the stage is set for the crisis of autonomy to come to the fore. The second phase of the organization's growth is capped by this turmoil for autonomy. The crisis of autonomy is resolved through the delegation of authority, which helps in gaining expansion through highlighted motivation at lower rung. But one serious problem that eventually evolves is the loss of top management control over a highly diversified field of organizations. The crisis of control emerged at the conclusions of phase 3, where field managers run their own shows without aligning plans, money, technology, or manpower with the rest of the organization. In order to achieve more efficient allocation of organizations' limited resources An elaborate network of coordinating mechanism is usually produced as phase 4 of the organizational growth. The organization becomes typically much more formalized. Rules, regulations, and rigidities increases almost exponentially. For sometimes the new system prove usually for achieving growth through coordinated efforts, but soon procedures takes precedence over problem solving. The chronic conflicts between line and staff becomes acute. The organizations becomes too large and complex to be managed through formal programmers and rigid system. Thus begin the crisis of reshape. The fifth phase of an organization's growth is characterized by strong interpersonal collaboration in order to overcome the crisis of red tape and the widespread conflicts between several subsystems. Developing the team becomes the theme. Social contra and self discipline take over from formal control. More flexible and behavioral approaches are adopted to attack the problems of managing a large organization. What crises do you anticipate at this phase of organization's growth? Nobody seems to know the exact nature of this future shock, as no organization has traversed so far. Larry Greiner, the author of this model, feels that some problems may emerge centering around the psychological saturations of employees who grow emotionally and physically exhausted by the intensity of teamwork and the heavy pressure for innovative solution. Do you agree with Grenier? Reactive and proactive changes. Forces for change arise out of an organization's interaction with elements in its internal environment. The action of competitors, suppliers, government units, or public groups may have substantial impact on change. Social and cultural factors such as lifestyles, value or beliefs also leads to important changes. Forces of changes may also arise from within an organization depending upon different phases of growth or demands made by different interested groups. Reactive changes occurs when these forces make it necessary for change to be implemented. It is passive compliance to the demands. Proactive changes takes place when some forces to change lead an organization to conclude that a particular change is desirable and goes about in initiating the change in a planned manner. The difference between reactive and proactive change corresponds, by way of analogy, to that between reflecting behavior and purposing behavior. An individual responds relaxively to a sudden intense light by eye blinking or pupillary contraction. This is an immediate automatic response without any thought. A purposive response to the some stimulus would mean devising a plan to shield the eyes or removing the light. It would require coordination of central nervous system and psychomotor capacities. Reactive change, like reflective behavior, involves a limited part of the system, whereas proactive change and purposive behavior coordinate the parts of the system as a whole. Also, reflexive behavior and Reactive changes share the characteristics of responding to immediate systems, while purposive behavior and proactive change respond to underlying forces producing the symptoms. In this unit, you are going to be more concerned about the proactive changes than the reactive ones. Management of changes requires foreseeing the need for change and going about it in a planned sequential manner. 11.3 Antecedents of Organizational Change. You can well imagine that there must be many reasons for which organizations change. In this section, we will discuss some such major antecedents conditions which serve a stimuli for change to be undertaken in an organization. Changing forces in internal and external environment. An organization changes its structure and practices as a result for the forces from internal origins as well as from external pressure arising in the environment. There are two primary aspects of organizational structure: differentiation and integration. Differentiation is the division of the organization into subsystems, example, research, sales, production, etc. Each differentiated subsystem develops particular attributes in responding to the requirements posed by its relevant external environment. However, differentiation requires the integration of these subsystems to achieve unity of effort and the accomplishment of the organization's goals. The more turbulent environment would be associated with a higher degree of differentiation among the organization's subparts and also a correspondingly high degree of integrative effort. Similarly, an organization forced with a stable environment would be less differentiated subsystems are and require fewer integrative procedures. The success of an organization depends upon an appropriate amount of differentiation to cope with the environment and also the right amount of integrative or coordinating effort. Researches by Lawrence and Lorch 1967 provide evidence for such a generalization. For example, in the plastic industry, facing a turbulent environment of rapid change in technology and unpredictable customer demand, the high performing organizations had the greatest differentiation and integration. In the standardized container industry, facing a stable environment of unchanging technology and steady demand, the highest performing organizations had the least differentiation and consequently the least need for integration. So you can see that depending upon the kind of environment or an organization is placed in, the organization has to change its structure. Of course, a certain amount of organization change may occur almost entirely from internal origins. For example, someone may decide that a particular department is so big and unwieldy that it should be split into two separate units. Internal change may also occur in furtherance of individual or group strategies for self enhancement or the aggrandizement of power. For example, a new unit may be established to provide a job for a favored relative to or to self an incompetent, obsolescent but undischargeable manager. But most internal origins of change are in part self generated and in part represent response to external pressure perceived by the members of an organization. For example, a number of companies have set up departments designed to cope with problems of consumer complaints. In the beginning of the unit, we have outlined some changes which have taken place in the last few decades. They represent the internal they represent the external environment force which influence organizations. Organizations face the need for both to adapt internally to external forces and to initiate changes in the external environment. These needs explain, for example, why companies engage in lobbying for legislation. They favor external influence, proactive change, but comply when laws not favored are passed. Internal adaptation, reactive change. Growth and decay. You have seen that an organization's growth presents many problems and opportunities for change. Decay to possess changes problems. It leads to defensive restorative changes aimed at survival and the essential resumption of growth. When growth occurs through internal vigor of pro-act lines, services, or market penetration, changes in gradual. Changes is more extensive when growth occurs from mergers, acquisitions, or exceptionally rapid success of organizational activities. Merger and acquisitions are undertaken for many reasons such as consolidating or increasing capital, pooling management talent, using facilities more efficiently, increasingly production and marketing capacity, and achieving vertical integration. Changes due to merger and acquisition lead to substantial impact on people. There is high potential for generating feelings of anxiety, fear, or insecurity among all organizational members from top echelons to rank and file workers. Sometimes this anxiety, if not properly handled, turn into hostility towards the organization. New personnel. Some changes is inevitable because of internal factors such as death, retirement, transfer, promotion, discharge, or resignation can constantly changing element in the external environment. No two managers, you will agree, have the same styles, skills, or managerial philosophies or the same personal needs. Managerial behavior is always selective, or that is newly appointed manager may favor different organizational design, objective task procedures and policies than a predecessor. The new executive will not be exactly like the previous one, nor even like those already present. In matter of intelligence, personality, and temperament, new manager may be quite different and still possess the qualification for the position. One of the most frequent reasons for major changes in company structure is a change of executiveness at the top. They usually begin the examining the structure below them to see if it corresponds to their ideas of what will be needed to do their job effectively. Upon taking over a position at the top, a new manager may make sweeping changes. Moreover, some who opposed the appointment are likely to resign. The filling of these top vacancies, particularly where the new persons comes in from outside, present a strategic opportunity for a re-examination of entire structure. Change agent. Change agent is the technical term of an organizational number whose role involves the strategies and procedures for bringing about change. Any individual can be a change agent at one time or another, but many people have positions, tasks, or formal roles in which their main assignment involves dealing with change. A change agent's formal role is primarily to plan and initiate changes rather than to implement them. Change agents serve as catalysts, interpreters, and sympathicists. They often work quietly behind the scene to promote change. An interesting kind of change agent is often referred to as the young Turk. The young Turks are new, usually young employees, eager and ambitious, full of ideas for improvement and willing to be a bit pushy and obnoxious or at least persistent in trying their ideas. Organizations sensing the needs of change when deliberately appoint young Turks to challenge the status quo. They are not always popular with colleagues or even their bosses. The best of the young Turks are those who have real talent combined with the measure of tact and patience. Do you think young Turks are a good idea of initiating organizational change? Barometers of declining effectiveness. Organizational have a number of ways of taking their pulse by looking at indicators from their own information system. A business firm monitors data on sales, absenteeism, or turnover, scrap rates, manufacturing costs, and numerous ratios of financial measures. Some firms also conduct regular opinion surveys of their workforce. Others have systematic methods of obtaining feedback from customers. In response to the information obtained through the above methods, the organizations make a required changes in organization to maintain the desired level of efficiency. Change in corporate strategy. An organization may undertake comprehensive changes even when no indicators would suggest immediate problem in its performance. However, current and past performance have been based on conditions that organization officials believe to be changing. Forecasts of long run trends may prompt a decision to enter new markets, to pursue a strategy of growth, to become less dependent on government, to switch from a centralized to a decentralized structure, or to adopt new technologies. All these strategic decisions have implications for changing the behavior of people in their organization. Nothing less than a new order is required to put such strategies into operational effect. Crisis. Not even infrequently, the occasion for organizational change in an unforeseen crisis, which makes continuation of the status quo unthinkable. The sudden death of a chief executive officer, the resignation of key members of a top management team, a strike by a critically important group of specialized workers, loss of major clients or suppliers or on whom the company has been dependent, a drastic cutback in budget, even spontaneous civil disturbances directed against an organization force a reorientation of the corporate posture and initiate a total revamping of policy, practice, and behavior. Crises create an unstable condition which is likely to become the stimulus for through going self assessment and reform. Personal goals. Leaders, interest groups, and coalitions have their own goals to see the company becomes more aggressive, to shape the organizations around some distinctive theme, to cast a particular corporate image, to further some ideology or philosophy. Seldom are these goals stated in precisely those forms, at least for the record or for public as consumption. More frequently, they are clothed in rationalizations about their presumed effect on profit and service. The domino effect. The last main source of change is change itself. There is often a domino effect in which one change touches off a sequence of related and supporting changes. Example, creating a new department may cause the creation of a new managerial or non-managerial positions, or change in assignments within other departments, budgeting, relocation, and office space. Other departments may need to realign their mission, structure, tasks, and staffing. It is quite common for people to fail to consider an domino effect. Such an oversight leads to problem of coordination and control, and necessitates effective planning. Proposes that limit the tendency of individual units to change only in accordance with their own needs before any significant change is made. Its possible consequences must be examined to see whether an undesired chain reaction will occur. To appreciate the complexity of the interdependence or domino effect of change, you need to consider more closely what is included in the work environment. Actually, in an organizational change, four factors are involved: task, people, technology, and structure. These factors are interrelated and interdependent, or changes in one procedures, alteration in one or more of the other work environment factors. Tasks refer to the job, which can vary in several ways or dimensions, such as variety, autonomy, task identity, feedback, and significance. People includes individuals who perform or fill various jobs within the organization. Individuals vary in their attitudes, motivations, and values, which influences their perception and evaluation of change. These can complicate the implementation of change. Technology include those methods, techniques, and processes that collectively convert inputs of the organization into its output. Finally, the structure embraces the job responsibilities and relationships of organizational members. Structures is reflected in the number of hierarchical level, span of control, number of persons supervised, and the way in which parts are organized and related to one another. Communication, decision, and power system are significantly influenced by such structural arrangements. Organizational changes can be introduced through the alteration of any one of these four variables or a combination of these factors. One of the pitfalls of organizational change is focusing upon one of the change factors and failing to gauge its impact upon other factors as they are related. 11.4 The process of organizational change. People change their knowledge, attitudes, and behavior when they become dissatisfied with status quo or when there is a more desirable substitute. A successful changes involves first recognizing the needs of it, second learning a new behavior or substitute, and third is feeling comfortable with the new situation. This changes process was best described by Kurt Lewin when he described the three stages of change: unfreezing, moving, and refreezing. The three stages of change will be described shortly, but before you proceed to look into the phases, you need to become familiar with three more terms which Kurt Lewin gives us to understand the process of change. These are the concept of quastatic, equilibrium, driving forces, and retraining forces. At any given point of time, any pattern of behavior is the result of equilibrium between two sets of forces driving and resisting. The present position is achieved because the strength of driving forces are and resisting forces is equal. If you have to change the present position, you have to shift the equilibrium where which is not quite stationary, that is quasi-static by any of the following means: increasing the driving forces, reducing the resisting forces, or by converting a resisting forces into a driving forces. After you have disturbed the present state of equilibrium by any one or a combination of the above mentioned means, a new state of equilibrium will be achieved. This state will remain for some times as after change phenomena as long as nobody disturbed the new found equilibrium. A clear analysis of what are the driving, push forward, or resisting, pull backward forces will help you manage a change better. Unfreezing. As a practical matter, change does not occur in a vacuum or no prior perspective. To the extent the new is different from the old and the old had value to the individuals, the old patterns of perspective implies a questioning and doubting of existing assumptions and feelings. For most change which is significant, the unfreezing requires a losing of emotions as well as intellectual forces. Unfreezing involves the following steps: recognizing the driving forces. Recognizing major changes in the environment and problems within the organization is the first step forward organizational change. Institute managers may recognize these process pressure for change and take corrective actions. In many organizations, however, the need for change may go unnoticed until a major problem strikes, and it may be too late to solve it. It's important for people like you to develop keen sensitivity towards the external as well as internal environment. Increasing the driving forces. Once the need for change is identified, it has to be communicated to the people who he one involved in the changing process. As noted earlier, if members know why the change is needed, they are more likely to adopt it. You can employ the following strategies to increase the acceptance of a change. First is express the need for change. People who will be affected by the change have to go why the change is needed. If they do not, they will hesitate to cooperate in the change process. Second, communicate the potential benefit. People have the tendency to ask, "What's in it for me?" unless they feel that the change will benefit them or that failure to change will hurt them substantially, they are less likely to cooperate. If no benefits can be identified, the cost of not changing must at least be understood. The third is protect the interest of concerned people. People fear changes because it may cause them to lose their jobs, income, or status. Assurance of job income protection, and maintenance of status can increase the acceptance of change. Fourth is get people involved in the process. Participation can also people accept change. Some individuals have a positive outlook on change and when they participate, the process of change is facilitated. Fifth is communicate the process of change. In order to minimize fear of the unknown, the content and progress of change must be communicated to employees. It is often difficult to know all the potential consequences and influences of a given change, but by keeping employees informed of its progress, management can at least maintain a climate of trust. 6. Use the respected change agent. The credibility and power of the change agent can facilitate the process of change. The change agent must be familiar with the technical and behavioral aspects of a given change and must be someone with an influence and organizational functioning. 7. Reinforce earlier changes. When an organization undertakes a large scale change involving a series of continual modification, it is important for people to see that earlier changes have been successful. Managing the resisting forces. Most of the strategies designed to increase the driving forces are equally as applicable for reducing resisting forces to change. People resist change because they perceive that it can be harmful to them. Thus, it is essential that they be made aware of its need and benefit. Understanding the reason why people resist change can help you formulate a plan to reduce the resistance. Moving. In the moving or changing phase, the individual is ready for new behavior and a change in perspective. It is important that he or she have an opportunity to build by experimentation new pattern of behavior and new assumption, perception and feelings. It is a time of trial and error learning characterized by ambiguity and tentativeness. The phase is typically one of careful guidance by an authority of learning the process of a new pattern of behavior before the whole can be conceived. Moving or change involved changing the organizational components. Traditionally, organizational change can thought to mean modify only one subsystem of an organization. For example, if there was a change in technology, modifying a task was thought to be sufficient. In recent years, however, more attention has been paid to larger scale organizational change involving several organizational components. This approach is based on the view that an organization is composed of favor measure components, tasks, structure, technology, and people, and that a change in any one of the requires changing the others. You are already familiar about this interdependence, which are discussed in the earlier section on domino effect. Refreezing. The final phase involved the establishment of a new perspective compatible with and leading to the new desirable behavior. In effective, the new part of one's total perspective is now established and integrated so that it fits the whole. This makes it possible for the new behavior to be accomplished as a matter of course. This is the period in which the individual or group begins to enjoy the reward of for the new behavior, either extrinsically in the form of social approval, monetary rewards, and the like, or intrinsically in the form of ego satisfaction, sense of mastery, and self fulfillment. In order to continuously reinforce the newly acquired behavior, the organization needs to maintain the organizational fit among various components that are supportive of such behavior. Without such organizational compatibility, the organization will encounter instability. Since the newfound behavior cannot be adequately reinforced in an unstable organizational climate, it may soon be discontinued. Unsuccessful efforts to induce significant and lasting change in organizational behavior can generally be traced to failure in one of the three stages described above. Either they fail to alter in any significant fashion the force maintaining old behavior, or they fail to offer a clear, satisfying alternative, or they fail to stamp in the view new behavior. Remember, however, that an organization operating in a complete dynamic environment may not be able to maintain a level of organizational fit for long, since both internal and external components change constantly. Organizational fit cannot exist at one level for a long time. Under this environment, you need to search for organizational fit at different level. For you, the task of performing organizational change becoming a continuous if process, finding a moving equilibrium. Based on this understanding of the three basic phases of any changes process, now you can should be able to appreciate the dynamics of successful organizational change. The success stories of change have taught us that the organizational change are typically initiated at the top management level after they are aroused to take action for setting things right. They might feel alarmed by a number of distressing symptoms but may not have clear idea about what the specific problems are. They might still hold on to their present understanding of the perspective and might engage in reflexive behavior. A lot of unfreezing interventions are required at the top to facilitate their diagnosis of problems areas and recognition of specific problems. Only when perspective is redrawn with the help of hard data, attempts are made to invent new tentative solutions and commitments are generated to implement the same. This is the typical trial and error changing process where experimentations with new solutions and search for result continues. Only when enough reinforcements are received from positive results are the new practices accepted and change established. 11.5 Coping strategies for change. Organizations depend on the environment of their survival, so they need to manage their external dependence and protect their core technologies from disruptive external influences. Every organization develops its own technology whereby inputs are subjected to people and or machine processes and subsequently become the output for the organization. Before resorting to any changes in core technology, all organizations attempt to protect it. You, as a manager, can attempt to protect the core technology of your organization by several methods. You may seek to buffer environmental changes on both the input and output sides of your organization's operations. Buffering on the inputs side may be achieved by stockpiling materials acquired in an irregular markets and their steady utilizations in the production process. You may buffer on the output side by maintaining warehouse or distribution inventories. You may anticipate change in the demands of the products and services of your organizations and subsequently modify production's schedule on the basis of new forecasts. When such anticipation or modifications is not possible, you are attempt to level the demand fluctuations through leveling techniques like offering inducement in the form of special sales in slow period. The more the organization is dependent on external environment, the more vulnerable it is. There are again three ways in which organizations can manage their external dependence: adaptation, avoidance, and control. Adaptation to external changes. Though adaptive strategies takes the marketing approaches to environmental demands, it usually starts with an assessment of the needs of the marketplace and then produces goods and services to meet these. As discussed by Sachin 1965, the strategy involves the following sequence of activities in the adaptive coping cycle. First is sensing a change in the internal or external environment. Second is importing the relevant information about the change into those parts of the organization that can act on it. Third is changing activities inside the organization according to the information obtained. Fourth is establishing internal change while reducing or managing undesired byproducts. Fifth is exploring new products, services, or methods that are more in line with the originally perceived changes in the environment. And sixth is obtaining feedback on the success of the change through further sensing of the state of the external environment and the degree of integration of the internal environment. From these stages of the cycle, Sachin indicates four conditions of successful coping conditions that are very similar to the ultimate criteria of organizational health. First is ability to take in and communicate information reliably and validly. Second is internally flexibility and creativity to make the changes that are demanded by the information obtained. Third is integration and commitment to the goals of the organizations from which comes the willingness to change. And fourth is an internal climate of support and freedom from threat. Avoiding external dependence. An organization can reduce external dependence in a number of ways. A. Finding an environmental niche. This can be done by selecting specific environmental domain which little or no competitive, no restrictive regulations, but plenty of suppliers and customers. Indeed, his is too ideal to be realistic, but some innovative companies keep other organizations out of competition and maintain monopolistic positions in the market. B. Reducing dependence through diversification. To the extent that the organization depends on the limited number of outsiders for its needed resources and outputs, the degree of its dependence on them increases. The organization can reduce these dependencies through driver USN. The organization may cultivate alternate source of suppliers or acquire new sources of supply and distribution or expand its product line for this purpose. C. Developing mutual dependence. When people or organizations depend on each other for survival or for positive exchange relationships, one party may not take an arbitrary action against the other because of fear or repercussion. However, when one party is more dependent on the other, the imbalance in their exchange relationship is created. This stronger party can take an action against the dependent on without being challenged in order to avoid such one-sided dependence. The dependent party may have to diversify its dependence or increase the other party dependence on it. Such a necessity for mutual dependence is vividly demonstrated in international power politics. Controlling environmental forces. Organizations can reduce their external dependence by controlling the forces in the environment that, in turn, control their behaviors. These forces may include competitors, suppliers, customers, legislative bodies, and unions. Many tactics can be employed, of which some are: A. Create an organizational structure with a large number of boundary spanners who interact with the environmental forces. Creating a public relations department or project group is an example. B. Appoint individuals from external elements who can establish personal linkages to those who control the environment. For example, companies that rely on defense contracts may appoint ex service officers to avoid such personal linkages. C. Create and participate in trade associations. They reduce competitions among their members and allow them to control their environments jointly. Many professional organizations protect their members' interests through such organized effort. D. Lobby the legislative and regulatory agencies to create favorable environmental for an industry or organizations. This is the reason why an army of lobbyists operates in Delhi and in state capital. Other devices can be used to control the environment as well as this includes such tactics as pricing fixing, forcing out competitors, false advertising, and bribes. However, these methods are mostly illegal or against contemporary social norms and values. For this reason, not many respectable organizations use such tactics explicitly or extensively. 11.6 Resistance to change. From its inception, the study of organizational change has noted the fact that many participants respond with dogged resistance to altering the status quo. Since the industrial revolution began, workers have at times sought, occasionally in extremely violent fashion, to block the introduction of new technology. Supervisors and lower level managers have balked at large scale projects to in job redesign and job enrichment. Even how level employees, the presumed beneficiaries of such projects, have fought such changes. Divisional managers have fought pitches battle against realignment of corporate structure. Even the proposal by a course coordinator to adopt a different text book is capable of touching of a frenzy of defensive tactics to resist change. Such behaviors may be either overt or covert. Overt resistance may take the form of employees deliberately failing to do the things necessary for successful change or simply being unenthusiastic about the change. The absence of overt resistance does not mean that resistance is not present, as resistance may be hidden from direct observation. Covert resistance can be more detrimental to change than open resistance because it is harder to identify and eliminate. Watson 1966 has suggested that there are at least two sets of factors which explains the process of resistance. One set relates to the personality and the other relates to the social system. In case of the personality relates factors, one can include the following. First point is homeostasis, or the tendency of the organization to maintain an equilibrium. Because of this tendency will change related phenomena are resisted. Next is habit. Since change entails a conflict with established habit, it tends to be resisted. Primacy. Next point is primacy. The way in which a situation is first encountered and the difficulties are overcome tends to be formally established. This becomes an established behavior tendency. Selective perception and retention. Next point is selective perception and retention. Human beings have a tendency to perceive and retain those aspects of their environment which are cognitively constant. An individual does not like to read or hear views which contradict his own opinions. Many a good idea is rejected as a theory which could not work in the practical situations. Next point is dependence. Since childhood, an individual learn to he dependent on adults or on others or comfort and security. For comfort and security, this tendency does not allow him to take the initiative and accept innovation and change. Next point is superego. This represents individual moral codes and ethics that decide the do's and don'ts of society. It provides an internalized code of control which may include a high sense of conformity. Next point is self destruct. Due to the various superego pressure, a sense of self destruct may sometimes be developed. The puritanical views may ultimately create a sense of self destruct, and to be good is to accept the status quo ante. Next point is insecurity and regression. It is almost a universal human tendency to seek refuge in the past when the going get rough. The frustration regression sequence hampers the acceptance of change when the change is needed most. In case of the cause of resistance to change in social system, the following factors have been identified. First is conformity to norms. The norm is in a social system are similar to habits in the individual. They indicates the expected way of behaving. This includes time, schedule, mode of dress, forms of address to colleagues, and indication of company loyalty, etc. Next is systematic and cultural coherence. Generally, a social system is made up of several components elements. When the system needs to be changed, relationships between elements have to be altered. Since changes in a diode or triode may unleash a series of changes elsewhere in two systems, the resistance may come about from the other elements. Next is vested interest. In the social system, it is not uncommon to observe the resistance emanating from individuals whose economic or prestige interests are at stake. The sacrosanct, certain belief and ideal are held scared by the member of an organization or a social system. Changes relating to these ideals are resisted the most. Cultural taboos represent a special class of events which are prescribed for members and serve the same function as superego. Rejection of outsiders. It is customary to suspect and show hostility to outsiders to or the others. In scientific researches also it has been observed that certain projects are not acceptable if they are perceived as sponsored by outside agencies and are not involved from within. To conceptualize resistance to change as a rational response to the threat of losing security, status, autonomy, and investment in the status quo leads naturally to the consideration of organizational change as a political process. Individual interest group and coalition favoring change presumably stand to gain either because of their identification with measures that renders the organizations more effective or because they derive personal gain through greater status, perquisites, prestige, autonomy, and the like. Since some peoples stand to lose or at least believe that to be the case, they will defend the status quo. What strategies and tactics will unfold? Both sides will seek early on to appeal to the uncommitted, those who have no strong feelings for the against the change, either because they may be largely unaffected or because they cannot decide whether the outcomes to them are on balance positive or negative. Appeals to this group may take the forms of lobbying, distortion, propaganda, persuasion, cashing in credits from old favors, implies threats, appeals to loyal and friendship, or mixtures of all of the above. You will usually find what winning over the uncommitted is a necessary but not sufficient conditions for actually ushering in a change program. Frequently, the resistors, even if a small minority, will include in their ranks critically placed individuals or groups who, even if not able to block changes, have the potential for sabotaging it when put into operation. Successfully implemented change requires some means of coopting these groups. This usually necessitates substantial modification of the originally proposed program. One means of accommodating resistors is to invite their participations in the planning, design, and process of carrying out programs. Numerous experiments and experiences demonstrate that when members are allowed participation in planning and installation of new productions method, they are less resistant to learning and adopting new methods. Participations forum give affected parties a sense of ego identification with the proposed changes, leading to a commitment to see the change effectively implemented. It also provides sufficient exposure to information about the nature and consequences of the changes to so that the anxiety out of uncertainty is reduced. 11.7 Strategies of implementing change. Ask any experienced manager how organizational change should be implemented and likely to get an earful. Most managers who have been responsible for implementation have developed personal perspective consisting of assumption and feeling about how change should be introduced. This philosophy falls into camps either tops downs or bottoms up. The tops down strategies. The advocates of these strategies believes that in general people resist changes and acquire direction and structure for their well-being as well as to work efficiently and effectively. The basic psychological contract between employees and management, it is assumed, is one in which the employees provide work, effort, and commitment and expect in return pay, benefits, and a clear definition of what is expected to be done. It follows that it is management's responsibility to design the changes it deems and appropriate and to implement this thoroughly but quickly by directive from the top. The bottom up strategies. The advocates of this approach profess what to them is more enlightened view of human nature. They argued that people welcome changes and the opportunity to contribute their own productivity, especially if the change gives they more the more variety of their work and more autonomy. These managers assumed people have a psychological contract which includes an expectation that they be involved in designing changes as well as in implementing it. Commitment to change, they say, follows the involvement in the total change process and is essential to successful implementation. Which is more correct? Is the question of correctness the right question to ask? What is your philosophy of change? If you answer the question was in effect the correct strategy of change depends on the circumstances, you are in agreement with the currently very popular contiguency school. Contiguency approach. According to the contiguency school, a choice of appropriate strategy and the implementation diagnosis consists of assessing 8 independent variable or factors in the organization. These are shown in the upper part of the figure 5, where each variable is given or continuum of potential values based on the diagnosis, which involves the basic implementation strategy will consist of selecting values along the continua for the 3 dependent variable as shown at the bottom of figure 5. Once the values of these variables have been located, and if the answers of the diagnostic for the independent variable fall towards the left of the continuum, then the implementation strategy would also be leftwards. On the other hand, if the values of variables tend towards the right side of continuum, then the implementation strategy would also be rightwards. Thus, the example, if there is very little time available, the crisis or needed for change is clear to all. It is a small organization, and so on. The appropriate changes strategy is top down, directive, and fast. So, whatever you are forced with a problem of managing change, assess the situation mentally and depending upon your diagnosis of the situation, you can proceed to the task of implementing change with reasonably greater probability of success. 11.8 Summary. We have discussed about the nature of change, individual and organizational evolutionary